live stream to YouTube. Okay. Let's see here if I can see that. Oh, we've got people on, so it looks like it's slow. The number of participants is growing quickly, so I'm just going to let Zoom do its thing for a moment. Welcome everybody who's here already. We're just waiting for other participants to get in. We'll just give it a couple more seconds and we'll do introductions and so forth. Okay, that looks like we kind of stalled the number of participants. That means everybody who was waiting has gotten in, and I'm sure more will join as we keep going. But I want to welcome everybody to the first XForce Data Summit webinar. This is building off the XForce Data Summit, which was a virtual conference that we held. We is Xplenty. We're a company that makes ETL tools, and one of our targets is Salesforce. And essentially what we're trying to do is have discussions and other virtual events in this time where a lot of people are locked down, where we can talk about all kinds of different Salesforce topics. So today I'm going to start with this agenda. We're going to do some introductions, and then we're going to deal with some data integrity content topics. Best practice for data gathering, data cleanup and deduplication, data enrichment. Unfortunately, the person who was the expert on that, Jeremy Boudinot, was unable to make it at the last minute today. So maybe I'll say something on data enrichment. I'm sure it'll be much less interesting than anything Jeremy was going to say. Then we'll go to backup and recovery and Salesforce in the enterprise. And by that, I mean, basically places people are using Salesforce as a single source of truth. So what does it mean to be a good data integrity steward in that environment? So to begin with introductions, and when you introduce yourself, if you have a hair curling, hopefully hair curling, interesting war story to tell, that's welcome. If you don't, that's fine too. Maybe just tell us a little about yourself. I'm going to start with Sten Ebnow from a company called Plotty.
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. Welcome everyone. My name is Sten. I'm the CEO and founder of Plotty, a company based in the Netherlands. We create two applications for Salesforce. They are on the App Exchange. It's called Duplicate Check for Salesforce and Record Validation for Salesforce. We do, of course, data management and data quality. So Duplicate Check is all about finding duplicates. Record Validation is all about validating your existing data if the address is correct, if the phone number is correct, of the postal address, of course. And when I really get excited about data quality was when I was doing some work for Procter & Gamble. They were having their global customer data center or customer contact center based on Salesforce and Service Cloud. And they were giving out coupons for free diapers, promotion packs basically, or batteries, etc. And people were just so, yeah, how do you call it? Creative about how to send those coupons in with different addresses, basically the same address, but that's all about data quality. So the ROI on return on investment on the data quality tool, only for that was immense. And that's what really well, data quality was the thing there to basically stop the fraud of people getting a lot of free packages and free promotions. So that's really when I was excited about doing data quality for Salesforce. I think that's all for my introduction.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to head to Andrea now. Tell us a little about yourself and if you have any data quality stories to tell.
Sure. My name is Andrea Hall. I'm the manager of our implementation team at Form Assembly. Form Assembly is a data collection tool, a form building data collection tool. Our biggest integration is with Salesforce. I'll tell a story that we actually see quite often. Within our Salesforce connector, we allow for and/or logic when you're looking up records to either create or update those records. And every once in a while, we'll see a customer that doesn't really realize their lookup is actually using all and logic rather than a combination. So for example, they're trying to look up a contact based on last name and email, or last name and mobile phone number, or last name and home phone. But what they don't realize when they're setting it up is that they actually have and logic throughout all of that. So the connector is looking to match on all of those fields. And 9 times out of 10, that results in no record being found. It's not going to match on all of that unless you have a contact who's keeping everything up to date. And every so often, this just happens to coincide with a form that is expecting a lot of responses once they release it. So that usually means they're expecting anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand responses in those first few hours. And that leaves them with a few hundred to a few thousand duplicate records in Salesforce. Luckily, they're usually able to just remove all those duplicates that get created. And then your data is actually stored in form assembly, so we can go through and help them get their connector configured correctly and reprocess all of them. But it usually does cause just a little bit of a stir up right there within the first few hours.
Yeah, duplicates. Thank you, Andrea. Our final panelist is Matt Kennedy from Own Backup. Tell us about yourself, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. So as you said, my name is Matt Kennedy, Director of Partner Enablement here at Own Backup. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since about 2009. Salesforce certified admin. I got a lot of years of developer experience. I'm also a user group leader here in New Jersey, and been with Own Backup the last 3.5 years. Initially as a sales engineer, now I switched over to the alliances team. So technical resource, working with a lot of partners, working with customers. And I think, we have lots of stories because we're backing up over 2,000 Salesforce instances. But the one that scares me the most is one of the customers we were working with, a company called Yadkin Bank. They've since been acquired by another banking company. But when you think about banks working on the Salesforce platform, right? I know you're going to talk later about system of record and source of truth, right? You think about a loan, and a loan record within Salesforce is not just one record. Usually there's lots of information that's associated with that loan. You're putting all kinds of application forms and everything associated with that. They had an integration that was running with Informatica, another ETL tool, and the integration was supposed to update these records. Well, instead of updating 45,000 loan collateral records, it deleted them. Now, just think about that. That's 45,000 records that were deleted, plus all the information associated with them. So fortunately, they were using our tool and able to recover all that. But if they didn't have a backup solution in place, imagine the damage that would inflict on their system.
Agreed. I'm gonna get to our first question here, and it's about data gathering best practices. What are the main gotchas to avoid when gathering data from a web form for use in Salesforce? I'm gonna shoot that to Andrea, but everybody else can chime in if you've seen web forms gathering data for Salesforce, since that's definitely a common use case.
Awesome. I have a couple points on best practices when you're looking for form tools to send your data into Salesforce. The first one is to make sure that all of your form field validations align with your Salesforce validations. So I'm not just talking about making sure a phone number is formatted in the correct way, in the same way throughout all your records, but also, if an opportunity stage moves to closed one, then this field is required and things like that. You want to make sure that your form tool is able to match all those validations and all those complexities. And then this will ensure that the data that you're actually sending into Salesforce is in the same format and all of your data is collected correctly every single time. The second one would be to make sure there's a spam prevention solution and that you enable that whenever it's possible. And this will minimize the possibility of sending hundreds of thousands of spam responses into Salesforce. I've also seen some customers that will leave that off of their forms, and they have a connector set up to create a new contact every time the form's submitted, and they wake up the next morning at 8 a.m. and have 200,000 spam responses inside of their Salesforce environment. So that's never fun. You want to make sure that's always enabled whenever you can. Form Assembly offers Google reCAPTCHA on all of our plans to help alleviate some of those issues. Next would be, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, it seems like reCAPTCHA is the gold standard. It's the only one I see anymore. You guys feel that way too?
I do. Yes, I have to fill that out on a lot of websites. click all
Yeah.
the stop signs.
Right, right. Well, they have that magic one where they just, if you click it, it figures you out that you're a
Yeah,
human.
it
I
just
don't know
knows,
exactly how that
watches
works.
through the webcam, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
The next one is duplicate management. Just make sure you keep that kind of top of mind, not only when you're choosing your form solution, but when you're building out your web forms as well. When you're sending your data into Salesforce, you want to make sure you're considering all the audiences that you're going to be collecting that data from. And then with that, you have to consider if you're going to be creating new records every time, updating existing records, or maybe a combination of both. So our connector does allow you to just create new Salesforce records, update Salesforce records, just do a lookup to find something that might be related and things like that. And this will eliminate a lot of possible duplicates that you see with form tools that only offer standard create options. And then the last one is the ability to pre-fill existing information into a form. If the ability is there, definitely do it. There's a lot higher rate of completion when somebody has a form that's half filled out for them already. The best example of this is a stay in touch form. Your form respondents are way more likely to give you up-to-date information when everything's filled in and all they have to do is look that over and make sure it's still accurate and hit submit. Your data is a lot more likely to stay clean and up-to-date that way.
Right. Somebody in the audience, Iago, asked, what your take is on too many versus too few form fields. And, I think what he's trying to get at is what do you find that the threshold for people just abandoning a form is when they fill it out?
I think it depends on the type of form. So like, for example, I've seen bank applications that have, let's say 10 pages, but on each of those 10 pages, there's maybe a maximum of 20 fields, and 10 of those fields are conditional based on whether you said yes or no to a different question. So I think the key is actually to just organize them. Any fields that go together, put those into groups and kind of visually show that they go together. Make sure that any logic is in place. So if someone doesn't have to fill out a field, rather than saying, if you answered yes, please explain, you can trigger those conditionally behind the scene and things like that. And then another great option is if you have some type of save and resume feature to enable that on longer forms. That way, if someone does get tired of filling it out in one sitting, they can save it and come back to it the next day.
Are you finding, Andrea, that the email would be the primary key, or are you using multiple, like if you're pre-populating those forms, what are you using as your lookups?
It depends on how somebody's getting to the form. So we see a lot of people who will send out like stay in touch emails from Salesforce. And in that case, you can actually attach like the contact ID or an account ID to the URL and use that as your main parameter in the lookup. And then I see other people who do kind of a two-form process where they'll have to put in maybe first name, last name, email, and then it will query Salesforce to look for the rest of your information and pull that into the second form.
Awesome.
I would have to say, I just worked with a client that was using a WordPress form, just stop, whatever, there's 100 of them. And you just don't, the ability to reach into Salesforce and populate the form just doesn't exist on a lot of these low end form solutions. And to me, that's a real impediment to user acceptance and quality data.
Oh, absolutely. It can be very powerful.
All right. Well, anything else on web gathering, or we're gonna watch me screw up the PowerPoint here. Here we go. Let's see what's next. That was data gathering best practices. Here's one for Sten, but everybody else can chip in if you've done this before. What's your take on Salesforce native duplicate management versus apps like Demand Tools and Duplicate Check?
Yeah, so there are a lot of
Duplicate Check is much better. Is that your take?
Of course. No, it really depends on what your goal is with duplicates and data management. So if your goal is if it's Salesforce is your sales organized tool just for meetings, etc. So basically sales. Then you will typically a simple duplicate management system is then okay for you. So preventing when you're entering new records into Salesforce that you have a sort of prevention mechanism, and that's about it. Then Salesforce duplicate management is probably the right fit for you, because Salesforce duplicate management can give you that. But if you're working with forms like form assembly, or even the standard web forms Salesforce offers, or if you have a marketing automation tool behind Salesforce, Pardot, HubSpot, Marketing Cloud, doesn't really matter which one, then Salesforce is going to be the customer 360 platform, the one record, the how do you call it? Then you need much more than the standard Salesforce duplicate management tools. Then you need batch processing. Then you need API insert protection. Then you need, because of all those marketing clouds and all those integrations into your Salesforce system, of course, can create records, can update records, can do whatever they want. And in the case of Andrea, just where you have the email address or even the ID, then that's not an issue. But if you don't have that information, then you're probably going to create duplicate records. And well, one example is one of our biggest customers is Education First. They have lead generation on the website. They have around 10 to 20,000 new leads each day. And their goal is to call each one of them, because they have offices around the world, within 5 minutes. But one person is going to hit that submit button on the website 2 or 3 times because they want different brochures, different folders. And they don't want to have a team calling that person 2 or 3 times. So within 1 minute after that submit button, they need to have to be duplicate checked. Or you can't do that with standard Salesforce duplicate management. That's just impossible. So it's really depending on the goal you're having with duplicate management, how much records you have, how many influx of records you have. It's what the tool you need.
That's interesting. Does anybody else have anything to add about duplicate management?
I was just going to add to that, because I think it's, and what Stan's talking about, it's really critical when you think about the amount of data that could be coming in, right? If you're running, maybe you had a webinar like this, right? And afterwards, there's a series of leads that come out of it, and they're all getting loaded in. We look at it as really, you want to make sure that you have a baseline of your data. So having a backup in place before any kind of large integration of new information or any kind of deduplication process. And then you want to have a backup during and after, so you can compare different points in time. Because if something does go wrong, right, if you bring in a large number of records and the data was formatted incorrectly, you want to be able to undo that without having your production org have a bunch of bad information in it, right?
Absolutely, because we have plenty of examples,
yeah,
fortunately, who have used our tool with an incorrect setup or something. Or where the intern is made responsible for cleaning up the duplicates.
Right. So instead of that being a manual process for an intern to go in and spend hours of time trying to figure out what was changed incorrectly, to be able to automate that, and compare all that.
We really have examples that they a database of, let's say, 10,000 accounts where an intern hit the wrong button and they only had 2,000 left.
Oh.
So, and then you really need a backup, because
yes.
So that's absolutely true. And it's all around our app. When you hit a merge or an auto merge, and merge cannot be undone. It's really loud everywhere.
Right.
So absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one strategy, if you don't have a full backup, is to, mark whatever's coming in from some third-party source, but that doesn't deal with any of the use cases that Sten just brought up. And
so let's look at the standards. If you look at standard Salesforce duplicate management, that's not really geared about enterprise usage, data governance-ship. So you don't have any audit tracking. You don't have any logging of what's happening inside your system, who is merging what, which is merged with what, etc. So if you have an enterprise environment with a lot of customizations, you need one of our tools, ours, of course, or one of the competitors, but you need a better duplicate management system than the standard Salesforce. And if you look at why Salesforce built the duplicate management system, it's because the competitors already had all that. So Microsoft CRM already had something like that. but especially for the GDPR compliant bit, you need a proper duplicate management tool if you want to be GDPR compliant.
No, that's definitely true, Stan. I think your story is kind of interesting, right? Because it's not just about, you know, merging of leads and finding things that are getting put together. Like you said, the same person's on that website maybe hit submit on 3 different pages, right? Now, if
Absolutely.
3 different people are contacting that person, that's going to be a really bad experience. So the fact that your tool can recognize that and kind of merge those on the spot is really going to save, you know, that customer a lot of aggravation. But same thing with GDPR, right? If somebody puts in a request to be forgotten and you've marked that lead and nobody should be contacting them anymore, and there was a duplicate and now all of a sudden they're being contacted, that's going to create a problem.
And that's a big fine in the European
Yes,
Union.
exactly.
Well, those are some interesting cases. Now we're gonna, since we touched on backup, we'll get into Matt's world here, and we'll talk about the key factors that Salesforce customers should be thinking about when they're formulating their backup strategy.
That's a good question. It's interesting. I mean, obviously in these times we're all social distancing, right? I mean, normally next week would be New York City World Tour. I haven't missed that event in 5 years, and it's going to be weird not to be there, right? But when we're out at these events and people are coming up to our booth, that's usually the first thing we get is they're kind of looking at us like, why do I need a backup solution? My data's in Salesforce, it's in the cloud, it's secure. And we're like, that's completely true. Like, you can always log into Salesforce. 99.999% of the time, you're going to be able to log in and access your data as it exists right now. But to Stan's point, if you're doing a merge, to Andrew's point, if you're doing forms and you're bringing in a lot of data, if something goes wrong, how do you roll back to what you had yesterday or the day before? So that's really what we talk about when we talk to Salesforce customers. It's not about the Salesforce platform. The platform's secure, your data's protected. But as an end user, you have the ability to modify your data, not just your data, but also your metadata. You think of admins going in, changing profiles, permission sets, workflows. We're doing daily snapshots of all the configuration files as well. So if something goes wrong, they can roll that back. So usually the question I ask people when they come into the booth is kind of like, have you ever suffered a data loss? And the most common reply we get is, I don't think so. And that's not where you want to be, right? You want to know, you want to be confident that you have a baseline and you can see on a daily basis what's being added, what's being changed, what's being deleted to be able to roll back, all right? You don't want to have that unknown about what's in your Salesforce instance.
So, I mean, one of the key things in any backup strategy is checkpoints, right? That you have, like, if you're going to go and do, you know, some big data change, that you want to be able to take a checkpoint. You're talking about logging, but I assume like Own Backup and probably the other big competitors probably have the ability to say, I'm about to do something really dangerous. I want to have, you know, checkpoint.
So our solution by default is doing a once automated daily backup. So usually overnight, we're doing a complete backup of the whole environment. But we do have the ability either through the user interface or through our API to do on-demand backup. So we'll tell people, hey, you're about to run a large deployment or you're running an integration, force a backup right before that. So even if you have the backup from last night, your user's been working all day, force a backup late in the afternoon and have another restore point. If you think about the native Salesforce solutions, the out of the box is a weekly export. So you think about, you know, maybe on a Sunday, you're running a full dump of your org, but then you could lose up to 7 days worth of information, right? And there really is no restore capabilities. It's basically just a copy of your data.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible. I mean, I used to do that because we didn't have a backup solution. Like, well, if some disaster strikes, I guess I'll figure out what to do with this
At least I got
that I just got.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the key differentiator we try to make with people is it's not just backup, right? Having a copy of your data is important, but the frequency of those backups, right? If you're doing it daily or if you're doing it hourly. But the hard part is the comparison and the restore, right? Yeah. If something goes wrong, to be able to look at 2 different points in time and analyze and identify exactly what changed, so then you can selectively recover, right? You don't want to be a time machine and say, hey, something went wrong today on a Thursday. I need to roll my whole org back to my weekly export from Sunday. I want to go in and just fix this merge that I did, or maybe this import that I did, and undo that, but leave everything else intact.
And especially when, we hit, of course, once a month, basically, we get a customer deleting something on accident.
Right.
And now the Salesforce itself is removing the, I think the capability for data restore, which they had. So backing up is more and more important because there's no failsafe anymore.
Right. They have something, Salesforce has something called the data recovery service that is retiring at the end of July. Yeah.
One of the things I know that there are other backup solutions on the market that do this, and I don't want to like put you on the spot, but one of the things that one can do that one might want to do also is you have some data that essentially you want to archive. Mm-hmm. You don't want it in Salesforce, but you want it someplace you can get at it.
Right.
Is that something that own backup? I mean, I think that's a desirable, I don't know if that's quite a backup tool, but.
No, it's a great question. We didn't have a chance to talk about this before the webinar today. Yeah. That's what our core solution is really about, backup and restore. But we did release another application last year. It's on the Salesforce App Exchange called Own Backup Archiver. And it does exactly what you described, which is basically for compliance requirements. You know, maybe you have older data. You could have case information, right, that goes back years. And you only need to keep maybe 2 or 3 years worth of that history. You can set up policies on our archiver application that says any closed case older than 2 years old, pull it out of Salesforce, put it in this offsite storage, reduce your storage in Salesforce, improve performance, but yet have the ability to resurface that data in Salesforce as a related list. So it'd be view only, but if you went to an account, you could see active cases versus archive cases.
And so where are those archive cases stored in, like S3 or?
Yeah, we do AWS S3 primarily.
Cool, cool. That's new. I hadn't.
Yeah,
I'd seen your product before, but I hadn't seen that.
We see some clients, you know, as you're using Salesforce, storage goes up, right? And if you're getting more and more information, it's a way to cut down some of that storage.
Cool. Cool.
That's also pretty useful if you're looking at duplicates, because comparing things with 4 years back is really useful, of course. Right. So if things are more archived, your duplicate checking will be quicker as well, and your validation will be quicker. So archiving is for us as well is key there.
Absolutely, because I could see as you guys are adding more and more information, right, that data grows, your searches, your reports, everything can slow down potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking at millions of records, then a search should still be there within the second, of course. So.
Right. Why wouldn't it be? All right, switching gears a little bit. This is just a general question. Getting to what we see with our customers is a lot of Salesforce as single source of truth, or as source of truth for a certain set of data in the enterprise, often customer data, which makes sense, right? So as a player in the enterprise, you're a producer and a consumer, right? And so as a consumer, how do you make sure your data starts and stays clean as you import it? And as a producer, how do you be sure the customer understands and uses your data correctly? And that's a question as big as all outdoors, but if you guys have some insight in that, please chime in.
For us, the most important thing in this aspect is define what your data is, because if you don't define what it is and what you want to do with it, it's difficult to basically tell the business or even the end users or what they need to do with it. And if you define what it is, you can also define the quality rules. So an email address should also always be this, or a phone number should always be formatted like that, or this is mandatory or not, and those kind of things. And also define what you don't need, because you can store a lot of information which you don't need, of course, and only look at the things you need for a data perspective. So I think that's very important if you start doing some data management, data integrity stuff from our standpoint. That's the first step. Define what you have, then define the protection rules, and then do the cleanup. And then monitor, of course, all around the globe, because you need to know if it's still okay or not. But if you get that enterprise feeling, define in the definition phase, you always define where is my data coming from, which integrations do I have? Is it form assembly? Is it any other tool? Define what comes in, defines what you want to do with it, and then start acting on it. But it's also the definement phase is the most important here.
I think it goes back to the question I had for Andrea earlier. It's about the uniqueness, right? What is the primary key of that data? And as she said, if you can look that up in Salesforce and pre-populate that form with a lot of the information, your quality of data is going to be so much better going in, right? You're not filling in a bunch of blank fields. You have it pre-populated. I think that's really the power of their solution.
Yeah, for sure. I think another big piece too of collecting data is not only making sure that it's clean, but that you're collecting it in a secure way and you're meeting all of your compliances, like you're talking about GDPR and HIPAA compliance and things like that. And we try to make that easy for our customers. All of our plans are compliant with GDPR. They're compliant PCI DSS level 1. Our compliance cloud is compliant with HIPAA. And then on top of that, we try to make it flexible so that you can, pre-fill in any data that you already have existing and things like that, and then push it to any CRM or database, the main one being Salesforce, but we have quite a few customers that push it other places. And then with, a few simple settings in your account, you can wipe that data from form assembly. So you can store anything that you want to that's been collected from your forms, but you also have the power to remove it so that you remain compliant. If your data, should only be held in Salesforce, then you can wipe an entire response. You can wipe just those sensitive fields, things like that. So I think that's another big piece of collecting data as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at the alternative, if it's an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file, there's no controls, right? It's free text, and you're going to be missing all the validation rules. You're going to be not hitting the drop downs with the proper values, right? You're going to get all kinds of duplicates that are going to have to be cleaned up afterwards.
Yeah. Go back a little bit. There's an audience question about you, Matt, basically asking how long does it take to implement the archiving solution once you've got your data policies in place, and a rough idea of the steps involved.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, it's basically, it's a managed package on the App Exchange. So like I said, you just go to Salesforce App Exchange, search for it. And when it installs, it's basically creating the structure of the archiver. At that point, it's really up to you to define the policies. And policies are pretty straightforward. They can run daily, weekly, monthly, but you pick the object you want the policy to run against. Like I said, if it's tasks or cases or whatever object you're looking to archive. And then you just set up the filtering criteria. So very simply say, like I mentioned earlier, whether it's based on close date or status or whatever it might be. So the cases that meet that criteria will then be archived out. And I saw that the follow-up question was the work on the AWS side. The storage is included with the application. So there is no configuration of AWS. We take care of all that for you.
That's nice. And then they just
okay, and then the retrieve. Yeah, so basically when you do that, we have a Lightning component that you can drop onto the form, and like I said, it'll just be a related list. So it knows what objects it's associated with. So if they were tasks on accounts, you could drop that onto the accounts and it would just pull up as a related list.
And the last question was about external objects, but my understanding of external objects is they'd be backed up in whatever system the external object lives in.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what he means by that, if he wants to clarify that, because we have access to anything through the Salesforce API. So if it's standard custom objects, if it's big objects, we can access all that data. If it's outside of Salesforce, then yeah, that would be different in terms of, yeah, a Lightning Web Component used to display the data.
Great, thanks, man. All right, on to the next. We're going to have another one for Andrea here. And I think we answered this a bit, but maybe you want to go into a little bit more. What do I expect? What should I expect from a good form tool in terms of data validation, which I think you've touched on, but also, a classic one is you have pick list that's based on a pick list in Salesforce, and you need to keep that in sync. What can tools like form assembly offer, and what do you think best practices are there?
Yeah. So I did touch on validations. I'll just say, one more quick thing. I think we talked about some built-in validations, phone numbers, emails, a number validation, things like that. But you also want to look for the ability to be able to define custom validations. So with form assembly, we offer a couple different options here. The most popular one is validating with a regular expression. And this allows you to actually validate almost anything. I mean, you can get as specific as you want it to with a very specific string, or you can require, a specific date format within a certain range, things like that. So that's another key feature to look out for with validations. And then in terms of Salesforce pick list versus form pick list, it's always good if you can find a form tool that can pull your pick list from Salesforce. So having that ability to direct your form pick list over to Salesforce and pull those values in is going to alleviate a lot of errors in Salesforce, or like in form assembly, if you get an error in Salesforce, it actually comes back to the form as well. And so you'll see that error in both places. Sometimes something as simple as a space, or even I've seen capitalizations, maybe a state is capitalized in Salesforce and not capitalized in a form, and that will throw it off. So being able to pull those pick list values in is very important and will alleviate a lot of pain points when you're trying to clean up your data and collect it in a very clean way. And then another thing that form assembly can do as well with dynamic pick list is actually query Salesforce to pull in a list of records. So for instance, you can have a form, let's say you have a household account and you send that form over to that family. You can have a pick list that actually shows all the different contacts within that account. And when they click on the contact, then that will actually pre-fill their information into the form, so you can like check multiple people in one form. And that can be very powerful as well, and making sure that all of your contacts stay associated to accounts and things like that.
So in the case of a pick list that is updated rarely, does form assembly check that every time, or do you have some kind of process where it watches and sees that pick list, the metadata, to see if that pick list was changed? Or
it does pull that in every single time. So
every time.
With our pick list, you authenticate it right on the form over to Salesforce, and you choose your object and your pick list that you want to associate that to. And then every time the form loads, it pulls in the newest values. So whether you're changing it once a year or once a week, it's going to pull in those values every time.
And so on the data validation, usually there's two tiers of data validations. The simple stuff sometimes is done client side, right? You have the JavaScript that, it's supposed to be a number and somebody put in a letter or whatever. Do you have that two-tiered thing, or is all your stuff making a round trip to get validated?
What exactly do you mean by two-tier?
Well, what I mean is, like, in the browser, if you have to put in a phone number and you start typing a letter, it just won't let you do it. It'll automatically say, oh, I want a number here. And it doesn't have anything, it doesn't go back to Salesforce or back to the server to do that. It's all in the client, it's all in your web browser.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have a couple different options. So all of the validations that you set within form assembly will run like when you hit the next page or the submit button, and it won't process onto Salesforce or whatever other CRM you might be sending it to until all of your form assembly validations are met. And then we do have a few other ones where you can require, strictly numbers or something like that, and it will only allow you to type in numbers. And then once it passes form assembly, if you do get a validation error from Salesforce, you can trigger that to show on your form as well. So then it's submitting to form assembly, but it's not submitting to Salesforce until that data is actually the way that it needs to be.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right, let's see what's next here. The next one's going to be more on workflow for dedupes. Let me share my screen here. This is for Stan. knowing that one size doesn't fit all, do you have one or more examples of a good data quality workflow, what you would recommend people do to for a certain application, for a certain type of customer? Give us an example of going through and, first you do this to check your data, then you do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's one global workflow which works for basically everyone, and that's prevent first, clean up after. So that's the global one which you can do whatever. That same goes for form assembly. They prevent first from entering information you don't want, and then we have tools to clean that up if there is already dirty data. So that's the most important thing. But if you look at what I think of data quality, so data management is often an administrator task. A consultant, Salesforce administrator is tasked to clean up our database, and I think that's not, and we as a company think that that's not the way to go, because I think data, and especially data quality, is a shared responsibility. So you should be able to ask your sales guy, or help your sales guy or your marketing guy or women to create data quality with each other. So if they're entering new data, they should be helped in that by entering correct data. So validations, a direct prevention pop-up, but also if they're looking at a record, they need to have the tools to directly clean it up. So they don't have to send it over to an administrator where the administrator has to go in again and do the validations, etc. It's still the salesperson is already on that record. If you do 2 clicks and he can clean it up, everyone is happy. So my goal, and I think our company goals, is to make sure that the data quality and the cleaning up process of data is a shared responsibility. And I think if you implement that in your company, that everyone is responsible for their data, I think the data quality itself will go up quite easily, because it's your responsibility. It's not someone else's down deep in the tech department, which you can blame. No, you have to blame yourself if the email is not delivered. So I think if you look at sort of broader perspective, that's my advice to companies how to implement data quality and data management, is make the team responsible, not make someone else behind the desk responsible.
It's a good point, Stan. I mean, a lot of people think about it like it's an admin's job to go clean up all this data. But to your point, and I think Salesforce has done a much better job with Lightning, is that when salespeople are entering a new lead, it should pop up and say, hey, this looks really similar to a lead you already have. And at that point, they can do that evaluation, right? And prevent that duplicate from ever being created in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also have the tools. So we have that tool, of course, as well. But we also have the tools that if you're, and Salesforce has it as well, if you look at a certain record, you can directly see if the email address is correct, phone number is correct, postal address is correct. And you can, with one click, you can revalidate it. So if it's incorrect, you can just say click validate and revalidate that information. And then, yeah, then it's clean. So everyone wins there.
It results in much better quality when the person that's familiar with that account can make the correction, right? Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's we call that within the company, we call it data happiness. So
I like that.
So we are trying to broadcast the message of data happiness across the Salesforce ecosystem.
It sounds like a T-shirt coming out soon.
Yeah.
Or a plush doll. One of the two.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we've got one more. I think we're getting towards the end of this, and we're going to ask. It's going to be last but not least is going to be Matt. We're going to ask a question here, and here it is. How do you tell? You're going to love this, Matt. How do you tell a customer with a zero budget? Do you have a better than nothing approach? Basically, what do you tell a customer has a zero budget? In other words, if you don't have any money, is there something that you can do? And the second one is, given that they have a zero, but nobody has a zero budget for anything, how do you convince management to invest in backup on the cloud to keep their data safe? What's your wrap on that?
Okay, I actually just threw a link in the chat because I think it's a great question, right? And we talked about it earlier. If nothing else, you need to take ownership of your data and use the default solution from the weekly exports, right? So Salesforce does have some tools that are built into the application. As an admin, you can schedule that weekly export to run and download that information in a manual basis every week. There's no cost to that except for obviously the admin's time. If that's too much, at least do data loader, at least do reports on some kind of a regular basis and extract that information. We talked about it like, your system's good right now and you're about to run a big integration. We'll do an export first, take the existing data with a report and at least get a copy of it. So if something goes wrong, maybe when you're running that job, keep track of the batch, know what was inserted so you can undo it if you ever needed to. So I think that's the key is, even if you have zero budget, it is still your responsibility. And the blog post that I sent just kind of talks about the out of the box solutions, right? And that you as the admin should know what's in your system and just take that ownership.
And the second question is, what's your elevator pitch to management to sell them a backup solution when they believe that the cloud keeps everything safe?
So that's great. I mean, we talked about it earlier. It's really about that your instance is safe, except from yourself, right? That's the biggest thing that we see is human inflicted data loss, right? Is that somebody does an account merge and then they realize they made a mistake. How do you undo it? They run a large integration through an ETL tool and it updates thousands of records or potentially deletes information. How do you undo that? So we always ask, what is your Salesforce data worth? If you're putting in a lot of information, you're running your business out of Salesforce, what would happen if that data went missing? What is that worth? And then, does that correspond to a purchase of a proper solution to protect that data?
Right. It's a great way to put it.
Absolutely.
Well, did anybody else want to chip in on that?
Yeah, for my personal experience, we're not a big of company, so I'm the administrator of our own Salesforce instance. And I think last year we bought a solution for backing up because everything which we do is in Salesforce. So if our Salesforce gets corrupted, the data or something happens, then our business is out. It's just like that. So when I realized that, then it was easy to make the money available to invest in that.
Right. If it's going to be a single source of truth, you don't want to lose your truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and especially we have a lot of customers where Salesforce is the single source of truth, the only source of truth. When then there's no option to not have a backup, basically.
All right. We're 48 minutes in here, which I thought we scheduled this for about 45 minutes or so. So I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up. I want to thank Sten, Andrea, and Matthew for participating and very interesting answers to some possibly interesting questions that I threw together. And I'd like to thank the audience for your questions and your attention. And we're going to keep doing these webinars, and anybody who attended this, of course, will be getting plenty of information from us about what we're doing next. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time, hopefully.
And
Yeah,
one last thing, following up with everyone with an email with just some more information about the webinar and from our lovely speakers. So keep your eye on your inbox. Thanks.
Great. That's Casey, by the way. He's the man behind the curtain. He did a great job. Thanks everybody.
Hey guys.
Thank you.